Welcome everybody to the live Tech Invest Roadshow, TechKnow Invest Roadshow Investor Webinar, where you get the opportunity to hear directly from the management of a selection of hand-picked ASX listed companies. We have hand-picked 3 companies to present today, and they are Kazia Therapeutics, ASX code KZA, Adelta Limited, ASX code 1AD, and Spirit Telecom, ASX code ST1. Each presenter will give a 10-minute presentation, and you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to ask questions, which I will then put to the presenters at the end of their presentations. If you do miss any of the webinar, don't stress. They are being recorded, and it is being recorded, and we will be able to share that with you via a range of social platforms and directly at the end of the presentation. Now, that's the housekeeping out of the way, and time for me to introduce our first presenter, Dr. James Garner, CEO of Kazia Therapeutics, again, ASX code KZA. Kazia are developing innovative treatments for cancers with significant unmet need, and recently they announced positive interim data from a phase 2 trial. With more on that and to provide an overview of the company, over to you, James.
David, thanks very much for the introduction. It's great to be here today to provide an update on our company, Kazia Therapeutics. And as you've heard, we're a biotech company. Our focus is on the development of new cancer drugs, and specifically our primary focus is on brain cancer. And that's going to be most of what I talk about today. There's really 4 things I want to try and get across today, 4 key messages, if you like, which I think are most relevant for investors. The first of these is around the pedigree of our drug, which, by the way, is called paxalosib. Now, we're developing paxalosib for glioblastoma, which is the most common and the most aggressive form of brain cancer. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But paxalosib was developed by a company called Genentech. And Genentech is really one of the very best in the business at cancer drug development. They're responsible for about $40 billion a year of cancer drug sales. They developed our drug up to early human trials and then decided that their company was going to focus elsewhere. They weren't going to focus on brain cancer. And so we were able to partner with them to take it forward. But what this means for investors is that track record is important. And this drug has come out of really some of the best experts in the business at cancer drug development. And I think that says a lot about its pedigree and its heritage. The second thing I think is important is investors are very well aware that the development of a new drug is a long, drawn-out process. Typically, it can take 12 to 15 years to take a drug from the lab to the clinic. And there's a very, very high failure rate along the way. Only about 5% of drugs that enter human trials actually end up as marketed products. So the good news for paxalosib is that our drug is very late in that process. We're very advanced in the process of human trials. We are about to begin later this year a pivotal study for registration. That is a study that will look to secure FDA approval for our drug. So we've really been over most of the hurdles that face a new drug in its development, and we now have the final push to make this into a commercial product. Investing in biotech is about managing risk, and although our focus is on glioblastoma, we also have studies going on in other forms of brain cancer. And so this gives us a diversification, if you like. It gives us an ability to weather any unexpected results in any one individual study. And should they all be successful, it gives us access to a very, very much broader market for paxalosib. So this is a broad clinical program with a lot of irons in the fire, and that really helps to spread risk for investors. And finally, our company has been well supported by professional institutional investors. We completed just last month an institutional placement that raised in total around $9 million. So in these uncertain times, we are well funded to see our program through the next several rounds of data readouts. And I think we can focus therefore on the work rather than on the financing. So let me talk for a couple of minutes about brain cancer. And if I can ask that we just advance twice here on this slide. I've compared here the discovery of new therapies for lung cancer with the corresponding picture in brain cancer. And as you can see, there's been over 20 new drugs for lung cancer in the last decade, and many of these have made a fundamental difference to the outlook for this disease. In brain cancer, by contrast, specifically in glioblastoma, the main drug we use is a drug called temozolomide, which was approved over 20 years ago. And really, the outlook for patients has not improved in the last 2 decades. So this is a disease that has been very underserved by modern medicine. And that's what we're trying to change in CARSIA. If we move on to the next slide, I've summarized here a little bit of information about glioblastoma, and we can perhaps just advance 5 times here. This is a disease which is not as common as breast cancer or lung cancer, but it's not a rare disease either. It affects about 130,000 patients a year worldwide. It has one of the worst outlooks of any cancer, with average survival of about 12 to 15 months from diagnosis, with best available care. So this is really a disease that is a very, very serious prognosis for patients. And as you can see by some of the names of prominent glioblastoma patients illustrated down the bottom, this is a disease which really can affect anybody at any point in their lives. It's a disease that doesn't have particular risk factors or correlations. It's something that can strike almost anybody out of the blue. Moving on, I've shown here the current treatment of glioblastoma. And as you can see, a patient who's diagnosed with this disease today typically goes through 3 stages of treatment. They have surgery, followed by radiotherapy, and they're then treated with this drug, temozolomide, which I mentioned a few moments ago. As you know, this is a drug that was discovered more than 20 years ago, and it's really been around for a very long time. It's a very old school chemotherapy drug. Now, temozolomide does work, but it only works for 1 out of every 3 patients. So for about 1/3 of patients, it will extend life by about 6 or 7 months. But for the other 2/3 of patients, temozolomide offers no real benefit whatsoever. And for those 2/3 of patients, there are no alternative first-line treatments. There's no other drug they can take instead of temozolomide. That's what we're trying to fix with paxalosib. We're trying to develop our drug for the 2/3 of patients who will never benefit from the existing drug, temozolomide. And as I say, these patients have no alternative treatment. So it is the very definition of an unmet medical need. Moving on, our drug is part of a class of drugs called PI3K inhibitors. And the reason why this is relevant for investors is that there are already 4 PI3K inhibitors approved by the FDA. So this is really a very well understood, very well proven, well tested, well validated way of treating cancer. We know that PI3K inhibitors work. The unique thing about our drug, the unique thing about paxalosib, is that it is the only PI3K inhibitor which is able to cross the so-called blood-brain barrier. Ordinarily, the blood-brain barrier protects the brain from toxins, but it becomes a real challenge in treating diseases like multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's disease, or of course, brain cancer. Most of our cancer drugs do not get into the brain very well, and this really makes them ineffective for brain cancer. Paxalosib has been developed specifically to cross the blood-brain barrier. We know that it does it very well. And this gives it an absolutely unique advantage out of all the drugs in global development in the treatment of this disease. Next slide, please. So I've shown here some of the data that's been emerging from clinical trials of paxalosib. I mentioned that we're well advanced in human testing of this drug, and we've been seeing some extremely positive data emerge from this. And I've summarized here some data that was recently presented at the American Society for Clinical Oncology conference in the United States. And we've looked at 2 measures of efficacy. Progression-free survival measures the ability of the drug to delay growth or regrowth of a tumor. And on this measure, we see about 8.5 months for paxalosib versus 5.3 months for temozolomide, which is quite a material difference in the field of oncology. overall survival looks quite simply at how long patients survive on treatment. And again, we see a very substantial difference between patients treated with paxilosib and those treated historically with temozolomide, 17.7 months versus 12.7 months. So this is quite a substantial difference on the face of it, and it's something we need to verify in a larger study where we compare the two drugs head to head. But if these results continue to bear out in a larger study, we have no doubt that this will be a very commercially competitive product. Now, clearly, our long-term goal is to extend survival far beyond this, and ideally to even turn cancer into a chronic disease. But realistically, very, very few drugs are curative at this stage. And in a disease like glioblastoma, being able to provide this sort of magnitude of benefit is very, very material. Next slide, please. Now, this represents a very substantial commercial opportunity as well as obviously the benefit for patients with this very challenging disease. Glioblastoma alone is generally estimated to represent about a $1.5 billion market per annum. And we believe that paxilosib could well be the next drug approved for this disease, and as such will have a very, very significant claim on a large part of that market. But beyond that, as I mentioned, we are developing the drug in other forms of brain cancer, and those all represent upside for the drug. So although glioblastoma is our gateway indication, we do see a lot of opportunity for the drug to extend beyond that. And even beyond brain cancer altogether, these kinds of drugs, PI3K inhibitors, are used in the treatment of diseases like breast cancer and blood cancers. And there's no reason why our drug couldn't be competitive there. Its unique feature is the ability to cross the blood-brain barrier, but in other respects, it is no less a drug than any other. And just briefly, some of the areas we've been looking at in terms of growth opportunities for paxilosib. You see there our own study in glioblastoma on the left, but there are also studies ongoing right now in the United States in DIPG, which is a childhood brain cancer, and 3 studies in metastatic brain cancer. Now that's cancer that has spread from elsewhere in the body to the brain. And when, for example, breast cancer or lung cancer spreads to the brain, it becomes very difficult to treat. So this is also an area of real need. One of the things that's been most gratifying is that we've seen each of these studies largely funded by the institutions that are running them. So they give us a real free carry, if you like. And then finally, we've hit all our milestones so far this year. We have some key ones coming up. We have data as soon as next week at the AACR conference, and I'll come to that in just a moment. On the next slide, I'll just say a brief word about our company. We are ASX listed, as David mentioned. We have a market cap of approximately 40 million Australian dollars. And we recently completed an institutional placement followed by a share purchase plan. So we are well funded for our next few rounds of data readouts. On the next slide, I've summarized just a little bit about the long term for the company. Although we are on the path now to product registration, that isn't necessarily the only way that we can realize value from paxilosib. Many companies like ours partner with larger companies or indeed are acquired by larger companies to commercialize their products. And I've shown here some of the kinds of recent transactions that have taken place. Finally, as I mentioned, there's a lot of near-term news flow for our company, some important and very material data readouts coming up in the near future, and we'll look forward to sharing those with investors. And on my final slide, I'd just say we have a lot more information on our website. We also have a contact facility there. We're always delighted to hear from shareholders. And next week, we will be presenting data at the AACR annual conference. It is free to register, so we recommend that for any interested investors. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and look forward to fielding any questions.
James, thanks for such a great presentation, clearly playing in a very important space. Just talk us through a little bit about the placement and the SPP. What we generally find, I suppose, with biotechnology companies is it is a long game, and you've got to be patient and you've got to understand each of the steps. You've clearly attracted strong investors who understand sort of the game that you're in and the hurdles that you've already jumped through to get you to where you need to go. So can you share a little bit about the type of investor that you've attracted and why they're taking this long-term view?
Yeah, David, absolutely. So our recent placement was almost completely taken up by professional institutional investors and mostly by sector specialist investors. That's to say those focusing on the life sciences sector. We did have an accompanying share purchase plan for existing shareholders because we always take the view that where we possibly can, any opportunity we offer to new institutional investors, we want to offer the same opportunity to our existing shareholders. As you say, young growth startup companies like ours go through several rounds of financing typically before they become financially self-sufficient, but we do want to make sure that we manage that very fairly. I think what investors see in us is really a few key things. They see clearly the pedigree of the asset and the validation that is offered by other drugs in this class. I think they feel very confident that there's a sound scientific rationale for what we're doing. I think they see the positive data that's emerging from the program and the signal that provides. Investors also look, I think, very closely at the quality of our collaborators. We work with some of the top experts in brain cancer in the world, places like Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, MD Anderson, and Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. And that really reassures investors that if the top clinicians are on board, then that's a positive sign. So I think all those things we hear as being points of real encouragement for the investors that look at our company.
And although when compared to the big pharma groups out there, you're small but clearly nimble, how attentive is big pharma to what you're doing?
Look, I think we're being watched closely. I think the more we present data at these large international conferences, the more we get on the radar of these larger companies. I think it's fair to say brain cancer has historically been a really challenging area. And so the burden of proof, if you like, to really get the confidence of a larger company is high. But I think we're really earning that credibility. We remain in constant contact with a range of potential long-term partners. We share our data as it emerges. And I think we're really starting to build that trust, that confidence in the Paxalosib story. So I think it's always a long-term courtship in partnering, but I think we're really investing the hard yards in getting that confidence around the drug.
James, a great presentation, doing some extraordinary things in an important field. Thanks for your time.
David, thank you.
Our next presenter is Dr. Tim Oldham, CEO and Managing Director of Adelta, stock code 1AD. Adelta is a biotechnology company developing novel therapeutic products against challenging drug targets using its iBody platform. Tim, we look forward to your presentation.
Great, thanks very much, David, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining me today. Adelta is a clinical stage company. We're using our unique iBody platform to develop the next generation of protein therapeutics against the most challenging drug targets that the industry is trying to address today. And I particularly emphasize the clinical stage piece because we've just had a real coming of age moment. We've just had our first ever clinical trial approved. And this is the catalyst that we're going to use to unlock the significant growth potential, not just in our lead product, AD214, but in our entire iBody platform. So today I'd like to briefly talk about 4 topics. I'd like to introduce our iBody platform and why it's so special and differentiating. I'll talk a little bit about AD214, our phase 1 product. I'll talk about our partnership model being validated by our relationship with GE Healthcare. And then our growth strategy that really involves doing everything we've already done to date over and over and again to add more value through more products. So what are iBodies? So if you think about a biological drug target, a receptor in the body that causes or is implicated in disease, and if you think of that as a lock, then an antibody is the key that either unlocks or activates that receptor if it hasn't been working properly, or locks it and blocks it if it's overactive and causing disease. And the key for antibodies and how they do this is a part of their structure labeled here, the CDR3 region, which is a long binding loop of amino acids that functions as the key that engages that lock very specifically. Ibodies were derived from basic research in the shark immune system, and the discovery that that CDR3 binding loop is really long and really flexible and creates a unique set of keys that can unlock some of the most difficult targets that are around today. And what Idolta has done, if we can just go back a slide for a sec. Thank you. What Idolta has done is to make that into a human platform. And this is what differentiates us from other antibody platforms. One, we have this wonderful flexible CDR3 loop. That means that we are the most exquisite key you can get for these locks we're trying to address. And secondly, it's a fully human platform, which is of particular interest to Big Pharma. We've addressed a whole range of targets with this platform. We're particularly interested in a family called G protein coupled receptors, or GPCRs, and these represent about 30% of marketed products today address G protein coupled receptors, but not particularly well. And yet we've really only drugged about 25% of the available GPCRs out there. So there's enormous opportunity for this platform. The business model for Idolta on the next slide is really pretty simple. Our objective is to develop as many iBody-enabled drugs as possible from our platform, and we'll do this two ways. First way is to develop an internal pipeline of iBody-enabled drugs, the first of which is AD214, and we'll develop these to phase 1 or phase 2 clinical trials before licensing them to Big Pharma. The second part of the business model is to co-develop drugs with Big Pharma and biotech partners. In this model, they bring the target, we bring our iBody technology, and we work together to develop the drug. It's funded by our partner along the way. So let me now turn to AD214, our lead product. We're developing this for a disease called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, or lung fibrosis. And why are we interested in this? This is a $1 billion market opportunity globally. It's an orphan disease. There are only 300,000 people living with IPF today, but their average life expectancy from diagnosis is only 3.8 years. There are 2 marketed drugs with forecast sales by 2025 of about 3 billion, and they actually don't work particularly well. At best, they slow progression by about 50%, but they don't improve survival. So there's enormous demand for better drugs. And in the current context, if we can advance one more, we also know that in the current COVID-19 environment, the burden of fibrotic disease is going to increase significantly. Survivors of acute COVID-19 will develop fibrosis, and antifibrotic therapies are going to be important, not just for the existing IPF sufferers, but for those who recover from acute respiratory distress syndrome, such as COVID-19. Next slide, please. So AD214 is what's called a first-in-class product. The lock that we're trying to address is CXCR4. It's a receptor in a number of, involved in a number of biological pathways. And AD214 is the key to stopping the migration of inflammatory cells and fibrotic cells into regions of fibrotic tissue. Fibrosis is a disease, essentially it's scarring of an organ in response to repeated inflammation. And you can imagine in lungs, if you get scarring, it stiffens, becomes less elastic, it makes it incredibly difficult to breathe. That's the problem we're trying to solve. Importantly, the key that we're using AD214 does not mobilize other kinds of cells. So it's very, very specific to this pathway and therefore differentiates it from the other products that are addressing CXCR4. In the last 12 months, we've made some amazing progress in developing AD214, and these are shown on the next slide. The first thing we've done is develop a robust GMP manufacturing process, and we now have the material necessary to develop, to administer to patients in our first clinical trial. We've completed the necessary safety studies in non-human primates to demonstrate that the drug is safe, and also to confirm that the duration in the circulation and the ability to bind to the receptors that we're targeting is sufficient to support our proposed weekly dosing regime. And finally, we've also tested the drug in the gold standard animal model and demonstrated that we can reduce fibrosis. So where to next? The big milestone that we've just achieved is on the next slide, is approval for our first ever clinical study. This is a big deal for our company, and we're now moving into dosing our first patients in July this year. We're also developing a PET imaging agent, a radio-labeled imaging agent, so we can actually see the drug on the CXCR4 receptor in the lungs of patients. And this is going to add enormous value, both from a partnering point of view and from a clinical development point of view, to our phase 1 program, which will have major downstream benefits in improving the development cycle. We also have proof of concept data emerging in other fibrotic disease indications. And while idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis is a $3 billion market, kidney fibrosis, eye fibrosis are $10 billion markets each. So we have enormous indication expansion potentials with this particular drug, and many opportunities when we go into phase 2. But that's not the only opportunity for Adalta. On the next page, you can see on the left a schematic that just shows the wide range of different targets or locks that our iBody keys have been able to address. And we're now developing these, this capability in partnership with GE Healthcare, who've brought a particular target that they're interested in for their immuno-oncology imaging business to us and asked us to find iBodies that bind to that target. They're paying us milestones and research fees and ultimately royalties on success, and they will have exclusive commercialization. So this allows us to add additional products to our pipeline at essentially little cost. So, where to from here? So today, we're a single product, single indication, single partner company. But the attraction to me, having joined the company just in October last year, the attraction was the enormous potential. Our aim is to become a multi-product, multi-partner, multi-platform company. So we want to expand the indications of AD214. We want to add additional molecules like AD214 to the pipeline, and we want to add additional GE-like partnerships to our model. So right now we're using the catalyst of our first phase 1 clinical trial approval to start laying down the foundations for that growth. Our objective really is quite simple. Everything we've just done with GE and everything we've just done with AD214 from discovery to entering the clinic, we just want to repeat, repeat, repeat. And that's essentially our growth strategy. The next slide, please. So why are we doing this? This slide gives you some examples of some relatively recent transactions for both fibrosis products, such as AD214, highlighting the value of those transactions. And you can see they're all made at phase 1 and 2 or earlier, and they all have multi-million-dollar, tens of millions of dollars and more upfront payments. Note that Roche and Boehringer, back on the previous slide, please. Roche and Boehringer have been very active in fibrosis. These are the guys who have the 2 marketed products today. So it gives you some idea of just how enthusiastic they are to add to their pipeline and improve the outcomes. You can also see that platform companies, either microantibodies, which is the category we focus on, or GPCRs, are also very active and very attractive, and that companies have been able to develop billion-dollar valuations on the back of these kinds of platforms. Now, obviously, I can't promise we'll be able to replicate this exactly, but this is the sort of target we're setting ourselves and the aspirations we have for our company. The next slide. We're assembling a great team to do this, and you can see the range of companies, the range of functions, and importantly, the number of large pharmaceutical companies whose expertise has been brought to bear either on our executive team, our board, or a scientific advisory board. And finally, you can see on the next slide, the vital statistics of the company. We're a $16 million market cap today. We have $4 million cash in the bank at the end of March this year, which gives us sufficient funding to get through the healthy volunteer part of our phase 1 program. And the next slide will show the exciting milestones that we have coming forward. We've just hit the big one for our company as a whole. It's the biggest milestone we've ever hit in our history, which is the ethics approval for our phase 1 human clinical studies. And this is the jumping off point for our growth. Through the end of this year, you'll start to see preliminary data from the healthy volunteer studies. And in January, we should see top-line results from the healthy volunteer studies. So, in summary, I joined Adalta. Next slide, please. I joined Adalta because there's an amazing platform that generates unique keys to unlock some of the most difficult locks or targets in biology today. We have a first-in-class lead asset, AD214, that is now approved for phase 1 clinical trials. And we've got a great plan to use the iBody platform to grow more internal and external products in our pipeline. We've got a great team driving the growth, and we're welcoming and developing a network of partners and investors, both new and existing, to help share in the amazing opportunity we have in front of us. With that, I'll hand you back to David. Thank you.
Tim, a great presentation. We do have a few questions coming through. How does AD214 compare to your competitor Pharmaxis lead candidates for IPF?
So they're a different mode of action. Fibrosis is a really complicated disease. It's a bit like cancer in some respects, and we still don't fully understand the complete biology. Many of the existing antifibrotic drugs are really trying to address the various signaling molecules that are apparent in fibrotic tissue. We're not doing that. We're trying to address and prevent the migration of the inflammatory cells into fibrotic tissue in the first place, and they're the cells that start secreting those factors. And we're also trying to inhibit the migration of the cells that ultimately result in the deposition of collagen. And so we're approaching it with quite a different mode of action. And as a result, we're going to be at least complementary, if not certainly different, but at least complementary to the existing therapies. And this is going to be multi-drug therapy. The FDA is already pushing all the developers to do combination trials on these types of products.
And are you looking for new partnerships for iBody?
Absolutely. So we're looking to be able to partner the platform. There are a number of companies out there looking for, with focuses on some of these challenging targets. They're a GPCR biology company. In GE's case, they're an immuno-oncology imaging company. And they have targets that they want to be able to address, but haven't been able to with traditional antibody technologies. They're actively engaging with us to help them solve their drug targeting problems. And so there are many examples of those types of companies, and we would like to have another 3 to 5 GE-like collaborations in our pipeline.
And do you give yourself a timeline on that, or is that just how long it takes and you know, finding the right partner is as important as getting one quickly?
Well, certainly the platform partnership is something that can keep going. We can add those as we work through them. The business development cycle is 6 to 18 months, so it is relatively long. We have an aspiration of 3 to 5 by 2023. We have an aspiration for 5 new molecules in our pipeline by 2023. At this stage, we're not making promises about the exact phasing of that. But the flip side is the transactions and the out licensing of AD214. Yeah, we'd see a major partnering window opening up as early as the second half of next year, when we start to get the first data out of the patient parts of our phase 1 program. And our objective for BD there is to have enough people interested at that point to be able to have a number of offers on the table. But phase 2 could be relatively cheap for us now, particularly given the way we're designing phase 1. And so we'll always preserve the option to run into phase 2 ourselves as well.
Tim, a great presentation and clearly a well thought out strategy being delivered on by, as you say, a solid executive and board. Congratulations, and we'll continue to watch with interest.
Thanks, David. Thanks for having me.
Our last presenter today, who will be bringing it home, is Sol Lakowski, Managing Director of Spirit Telecom, ASX code ST1. Now, Spirit recently announced that its Spirit X platform, Australia's largest digital aggregator of business internet products, has launched the NBN Enterprise Ethernet range to its reseller and direct customers via its sales platform. Sol, over to you.
Thanks, David, and welcome all investors. If I could just move to the next slide. So, look, as an investor and as a CEO in the sector, I will start the presentation with a growth perspective on how quickly our business is growing. Not just about the business, but in terms of what we've achieved over the last period. So just probably to give you a perspective of the growth rates that Spirit has had on a year-on-year basis, this is the most recent trading update that we've had in particular. And you will see phenomenal growth rates from on a year-on-year period for Jan and April, and also from the 19 year to the 20 year as well. So what do we do apart from growing at an exponential rate? We are Australia's leading provider of IT&T services and telco services to small and medium-sized businesses and essential service providers across Australia. So we do that through our own network, we do that through managed services and IT services, and we've inserted ourselves into an infrastructure or structural change that are occurring. In terms of our trading update, the last quarter or the last 4 months, we were doing revenues around $4 million. May was very strong for us as well. I do want to also point investors to our recurring revenue line. So what does recurring revenue actually mean? It means that we have contracted clients on an ongoing basis paying for portfolio or annuity income. So that means we're secure, we've got longevity in our balance sheet, we've got longevity in our cash flows. So in terms of a summary, if you want to see us from a year-on-year perspective, our total revenue was up 140% to 14.3 mil in B2B, and up 216% up to 12.4 as well. On the recurring revenue, which is critical during an environment which is volatile, as we all know, we grew that 60% to $8.6 million. In terms of the balance sheet strength, we recently completed a placement which was oversubscribed by a significant factor over the last period of time as well, and we raised $9.2 million. CBA, who's our banker, also increased their debt facility. So in terms of the balance sheet strength at our disposal right now, I'm pleased to say that we have just under $15 million for acquisition and organic growth. Our market capitalisation, so we swing somewhere between 85 mil and $93 million over the last 2-3 weeks. Our investors, large institutional investors, high net worth individuals and family offices. If you're a client with Shaw Stockbroking, we do have a buy on the stock right now in the range of, I think today we're trading in the 19 to 21 cents. Shaw's has us at around the 25 to 28 cent mark as well. So apart from the technology side in terms of where we've inserted, as an investor, you have a business that's growing at a high rate with recurring revenue streams as well. Next slide, please. Just in terms of the sectors that we play in, just to give you a view of the diversity of income that comes through the business as well. SMBs make up just under 40%. We're very strong in the hospital market, so that's why we've been resilient at this time as well. We haven't seen any material impact. In fact, we've grown through the COVID period as well. So if you're looking for growth and if you're a bit risk averse, we've got the recurring revenues and we've also got the diversity coming through that particular revenue side of our business. How do we grow? We do it through two ways. We've acquired 7 IT and telco businesses over the last 12 months. I'm pleased to report that 6 of those are already integrated across their billing systems, across their sales, marketing, brand teams. But we're not just a reseller. We also have our own high-speed network. So we have a fixed wireless network across multiple parts of Australia, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, and we sell those products at a 74% gross margin. So what we are is a modern telco. We have our own network, but we also provide IT services over the top. But we also have a unique value proposition, and that's why we're growing. We can install services compared to the Telstras, the Optus, who might take 3 months or 2 months. We can install services in under 5 days for high-speed internet for those businesses. So we're not just nimble, we're innovative, and we're also quick, and we provide an old level of fashion service. You can actually get through to us on the phones, and you can speak to somebody sitting, obviously, in Australia and selling you that product, and you have that trust. Next slide, please. So how do we do it, and what makes us different? So as I mentioned, we have our own high-speed network, but gone are the days when we used to walk into a business and provide them with a high-speed link. So we would walk in, provide a high-speed internet service to a business, and then walk out and pat ourselves on the back. We no longer do that because we want a larger clip of the ticket and we want to bundle service over the top. So these days, what we're actually doing is providing a modern telco service. That includes the high-speed internet, that includes the security services, the managed Wi-Fi. The way I describe it simplistically is, imagine that we are the modern version of Officeworks with the different aisles. And these are the aisles that we're selling these days. So if you walk into Officeworks or you walk and see your office, you see a pen, you see a paper, you might see a highlighter. We're the modern version of that. The difference here is we have owned the network, so it's on our balance sheet. The second part is we bundle those products and services in a very complex way, right? So it's very difficult for the customer to get out, and we've got annuity revenue stream. So we're guaranteed those revenues coming through our P&L, and obviously we have our own network sitting on balance sheet. So think of what is this business if you had to describe as an investor. We are the modern day version of Officeworks, and that's where we're growing. Why are we growing? We're nimble, but there is a structural change actually occurring across SMBs who are moving to the cloud. So we have an innovative point of presence on our network, but we're also embedding ourselves into a structural change and taking advantage of that. So in terms of look at this stock as one that is actually inserting itself into an industry change and then executing those services within that. Next slide, please. So what is the makeup of our business and how is it structured today? So we've got three key divisions. SpiritX Digital, that was discussed earlier, is our aggregation platform, and these slides are a little bit dated now since we launched the NBN product. So we're now Australia's largest aggregator of B2B telco services. So you can go on our website, either as a direct customer, press the check address button, and we can hit 2.7 million business premises and sell your product. Not only can we service qualify it, but we can do a straight through contract at that point as well. So we now have customers not speaking to our business development managers, but selling all the way through. Spirit Internet and IT, that's our network business. So that's where we're selling high-speed internet and the bundled services that I mentioned earlier on one bill, one service level agreement. Why that's important is because businesses no longer want to talk to Telstra for their internet and an IT service shop down the road. They want a bundled service, and they want to know if they've got an issue, they can actually speak to one provider around that. And Trident, our most recent acquisition, is where our essential services are actually provided to hospitals. We do all the major schools across Victoria, and looking at expanding that product set into Sydney as well. So that's the structure of the business, and that obviously is before any acquisitions. As I've mentioned, we're aggressively looking at acquiring. We've got 2 to 3 acquisitions in the pipeline going through DD, and then we will also look at adding those products and bundles through acquisition as well. Next slide, thank you. So this is a slide that shows us not just the growth rate but coming through revenue, but sales. So we're executing to a very particular sales focus, and I'll explain that and try to, I guess, break the bar graphs here up to show you why this is salient and so important. What total contract value is the life of the contract and how much it's worth. And we're writing only just through the last 4 months, circa $5 to $6 million worth of contracts that will have a contract life on average of 3 years. Now, why is the 3 years important on the data? What that means is we've written the contract on the high-speed internet for that business. But if we've signed that business up on average for 3 years, and we have some contracts that go out to 4 or 5 years, that gives us the opportunity to have a conversation about an upsell of IT services for that 3-year period, which means that we then have control not just off the high-speed internet for that business, but we also at the same time have the governance, and we also have control over their network. It's very difficult for a business to exit that particular provider. So what you see here is a business not just growing on the revenue side, not just booking away good recurring income and building a portfolio of annuity streams, but it's growing during very difficult economic times as well, and locking those contracts away for 36 months. Next slide, thank you. SpiritX is our digital platform. It's a piece of intellectual property that was all built in-house, all driven by our own CapEx. And we are now the largest provider of digital services, of digital internet products for businesses in Australia. So in 3 clicks, and this is what I call a modern distribution platform. You don't need to speak to anyone. If you do, you can. You can qualify your address. You can go in, select a product, and there's typically anywhere from 37 to 40 products that are listed. And you can select the product that's right for your business. If you want to talk to a business development manager, you can certainly do that. But no longer what you see here is we need to own all the infrastructure to sell to businesses. This is a unique platform. We only launched this through December and January, and we've had over 6,000 unique leads coming through that. We've also recently, to promote the platform, we launched our first mainstream brand advertising nationally. So we are now a national organisation. We're on Sky News and advertising on Sky News. We were on the NRL Footy Show. We're on Channel 9, we're on billboards in Sydney and Melbourne, AFR.com, and all of those media platforms now advertising the brand and seeing very strong lead flow coming through. Next slide, thank you. So in SpiritX, and what does it do and how does it work and how does it sell more product? Well, it's got 3 audiences: resellers, who resell the product and take a clip, wholesalers who white label the product, and businesses direct who can sell that. So not only is it a digital platform, but it's got 3 distribution channels that come through as well. So important, you've got multiple audiences feeding leads into that particular channel. Next slide, thank you. I'll skim through this, but just to remind investors, we are not just a reseller. We have our infrastructure across multiple parts of the business. And we not only sell off our own platform and our own fixed wireless, but we sell off others as well. So effectively, we bundle NBN with our network, and therefore that means we can get to 2.7 million locations across Australia when we sell B2B internet. Once we've sold the B2B internet, we're then having a conversation around their IT services and bundling those products into one bill. So our customers are getting one bill, they're getting one service level agreement, and that is what our vision of a modern telco is. But it's not just our vision. I think you will see from our financial trading update that we're actually executing with strong sales and revenue numbers coming through. Thank you. Next slide. Just in terms of where we're heading to be 2 parts: organic growth through the SpiritX platform, obviously through our mainstream advertising, and we've got $14.8 million to deploy in acquisitions. I'm not going to put a time frame to it, but if you can see the history of the business, we did 7 acquisitions over the last 12 months. We will look at acquiring in this quarter or next quarter. So what you have is a share price here that's pre-acquisition, right, with a buy on it. Final slide. Thank you, David. That's the board of directors. So James Jocelyn, very well known in M&A circles, was the head of M&A in Ernst & Young. Greg Ritter, who's the chairman of Kogan.com. So Greg became a director at Spirit only in October last year. And Greg came on because of what we've developed with the SpiritX platform after having 4 years at the reign as chairman of Kogan.com. So I can assure you, if Greg didn't believe in how we're executing SpiritX from a digital platform, you wouldn't have joined an organisation coming off $1 billion Kogan.com. Myself, a mixture of private equity, I've exited multiple businesses at a profit for investors. Terry Gray, very well known in the broker circles, and Mark DeGuardio, who is both an executive director and my chief operating officer, is the ex-CIO of IINet that obviously was acquired by TPG. So very strong board of directors, very strong management team. And as you see the numbers, we are a growth stock, and we're not just growing, but we're executing in the marketplace as well as that challenger brand for telco. And telco and IT certainly need a kind of a robust challenger and somebody who can be pugnacious in the way they execute to the business market. That's Spirit. I thank you very much for your time, and I hope there's some questions to come.
So a great presentation and clearly shaking up the telco space. One question I had for you around acquisitions. You've been very acquisitive and been able to bed down those acquisitions and extract the economies of scale. What does a perfect acquisition look like for Spirit?
Oh, there are no perfect acquisitions, David. They don't actually exist. But a good one, the principles we start with are people and profit. So if we can get the profitability of the business right and people right, they're much easier to integrate. And so the 2 sectors that we're looking at are managed service providers and telcos. Typically telcos that are in the revenue mix around 15 to 25 millions with EBITs around 3 to 4%. But the perfect one gives us more products that we can put into SpiritX, because we're getting enormous traffic. If you search business internet, we're the #1 or #2 on Google, right? And we've done that organically. So we're getting enormous traffic coming through the business. We do need more product. And I'd like to also add a business that gives me more wholesale distribution, because we currently have 130 partners. If we can add another 100 partners, they will triple or double our EBITDA, because it goes straight to the bottom line through SpiritX in terms of buying those products. So a good wholesale distribution channel and new products would be very helpful. And that's the space that we're targeting a couple of different acquisitions as we speak.
And is it important to also have, as a target, anything that owns its own fixed wireless infrastructure in markets you're currently not in from a fixed wireless perspective?
Not necessarily fixed wireless, but definitely we're not interested in people who just rebuild, right? We're looking for layer 2 network infrastructure that we can control it. The reason for that is that we want to be able to see the customer all the way from the internet into their own network, because that's our differentiation point. we can actually, if there's an issue, we know where the fault is, we can fix it instantly, and you don't have to spend an hour being on the phone with them. The other part, we do all our acquisitions with earnouts. Nobody gets a transaction completed up front. So any vendor coming into this organisation stays, and they have a target that they need to hit the multiplier effect of their earnout. So everybody's here as part of a family with a bigger view of what we want to do in terms of the share price and the market cap of the business.
And as you continue to expand, be it organically or through M&A, what's the sort of infrastructure investment you may need to make?
It's actually the infrastructure investment is probably actually more in SpiritX, David, because we've actually lowered the capex on the fixed wireless network significantly because we've nearly finished, and Sydney was our last piece to the puzzle. So my answer will be the infrastructure. Most of the capex for 21 will actually go into the expansion of the digital platform, because that is the modern day of how you sell telco. If you look at Kogan, if you look at Amazon, you don't have to own everything to make money. So our capex investment will not be like an old world telco laying more fibre and then hitting the depreciation. We will continue to invest in the smarts and the customer experience in SpiritX. So my answer is a modern digital point of capex rather than an old world. We've already got the network. We don't need anything more. What we're investing is customer experience and the ability to sell product in a modern customer experience for B2B in the SpiritX platform. So think of it as digital capex, not infrastructure capex.
Yep, understood. And just maybe a wider question. So Unity just announced a big acquisition. Is there still room, do you think, in the market for telco IT companies like yourself to deliver that significant growth?
Yeah, probably on market, Unity tried to take Spirit over last year as well. So they had a dip at us. I'm not sure if investors are across that. So what you see is two very different businesses. And credit to the guys at what they've done. Unity, fundamentally, that's an infrastructure play, right? So we are very strong on distribution, the amount of leads that we generate. So we're actually complementary to those type of assets. And Opticom, I won't go into the detail, but we have their products are in SpiritX. And we also have a relationship and a JV with Opticom on another piece of work as well. So there is actual work that's done across those organisations. So my answer is it's complementary. We are a very aggressive distribution play. They're a very aggressive infrastructure play. You need both to execute in the marketplace. From there, I'll let investors work through the mechanics and the jigsaw and how it may fall. But I think you'll see the market's hot. There will be further consolidation, and we will be part of that consolidation as well.
And look, as a growth stock, it may not be a focus initially, but break-even NPAT, how are you sort of tracking along in that regard?
Yeah, look, it's probably hard on this call to give guidance, but we've had
I don't want you to give guidance. And,
No. So look, we've had a really good quarter. We'll continue. NPAT, I expect us in 21 to be NPAT positive. But the focus, right, if you look at the growth rates we're experiencing, I could easily make it a highly profitable organisation today, but I'd probably shave off 50% of the growth rates, David. And I think the investors in this space are looking for growth, and they will be a little bit more patient on the NPAT. So the NPAT is definitely doable almost immediately. And in fact, we've been profitable for a few months here and there, right? But I'm not going to take my foot off the accelerator on the growth rate and expanding the digital X platform and the brand as well. Because I think there's an opportunity for us to be a disruptor, and that has to come through market share, not just NPAT. The NPAT is actually easy. You pull the levers of OPEX. Growing market share is harder. So I'm focused on market share, and there's plenty of market share to acquire or organically grow as well.
And so, as you say, the market share growth has been exceptionally important because it's not one-off revenue, it's recurring revenue. So as you grow your market share, it just continues to build the foundation of what is an exceptionally strong business already.
That's right. So you look at, you're never going to go broke if you're running annuity-based businesses, all right? So I actually, have had a telco career and spent 10 years in banking. So I model the business very much around the annuity streams, around the banking portfolios, and those portfolios, you can easily reduce the OPEX, right? Once you've excuse me, once you've locked in those actual revenue streams. But to get them, you need market share. So very strong recurring revenues, and all the businesses that we'll acquire have 60 to 80% of their contracts are recurring. So we're not just buying contracts or goodwill, we're buying recurring revenue streams and then bolting those into SpiritX's products as well. So, you know, the jigsaw to this business is anything we acquire, it's a 1 + 1 = 4, not a 1 + 1 = 2.
So a great presentation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody on the call. Appreciate it greatly.
Well, that brings to a close our webinar for today. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you for joining in and the presenters for providing such great insights into their respective businesses. We will be sure to keep you updated on future events and will advise you and all those who registered once the recorded copy of the webinar is available to watch, which will be in the next few days. Remember, when looking at stocks, do your own research and where appropriate, seek professional advice prior to making investment decisions. We wish all of you a great day and thanks for attending.